yeah, and in a way, every injury I've had has allowed me to learn more about the human body. And when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, you wouldn't understand," I'm like, "Try me."
What was school like for yourself growing up?
Uh, I got terrorized at school. I was not the cool kid.
Did it affect your mental health?
Yeah.
How did it affect your mental health? So, Katie, take me back to when you was first brought up in Hampshire. What was it like growing up in Hampshire?
It's nice. Yeah, it's a nice part of England. It's pretty. It's quite rural. I'm in Basingstoke. Well, that's where I'm from,
Okay.
which is a fairly normal English town, I suppose. It's a London suburb, so yeah, it was fine. I went to a nice little village school and then got thrown into a huge secondary school, which was a bit of a shock to the system. But yeah, it's a nice place.
So then, what was school like for yourself growing up?
I got terrorized at school. I was not the cool kid. Yeah. I remember sports days. Like, I didn't know at the time with my Ehlers loss that I could never do a roly poly. So even on sports days, they had to make all the cones wider so that I could do a sausage roll.
So you touched on this, Ehlers. What is that?
Uh,
For people that don't know, obviously I know Katie. I've worked with Katie before as well. We skipped a part. We skipped her childhood, which we are going to touch on. In fact, let's touch on it now because Katie's very modest. Let's go back to your childhood, and then we'll go back to the actual school years. Beanbag, what does that mean to you?
Beanbag was a nickname I inherited because I had no interest in crawling or learning to walk. At the time, no one really understood why. They just thought I was a late bloomer. But my mum used to put me down, go away, do whatever she needed to do and come back. And I would be sat exactly where she'd left me. In fact, I still do it now. I'm happiest sat on the floor. But that became my nickname because I was literally a beanbag. You could put me down and I would stay there. So yeah.
To be fair, I like sitting on the floor.
Yeah. No one knew at the time it was actually because I have Ehlers, but it was just such a rare sort of genetic disorder that people hadn't clocked that would possibly be the reason.
So what is Ehlers?
Sorry, my dog's downing his bowl of water. Ehlers is one of, it's 13 connective tissue disorders. There's 13 different strains of it.
Okay.
Buddy. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's a connective tissue disorder. So, I mean, I can literally show you my shoulder, but it basically, for some people, it will affect the heart. So there's different types. Some people have vascular Ehlers, which affects literally the veins, arteries, every part of your body. Some people it's hypermobile EDS, which is what I've currently been diagnosed with, and they're investigating to see whether I have one of the other subtypes. It means that all my joints are lax. So fingers, my elbows bend the wrong way, knees. It affects the laxity of the skin and the way that your body basically handles collagen. So all of my ligaments are too long. So for example, my shoulder, if I don't hold it in socket, it literally falls out. There's no tension through the ligaments in my knees, hips, elbows, shoulders, jaw. And then it affects the way that fascia, which is a connective tissue inside the body, holds your organs in situ, which is why I've had to have all the surgeries I've had.
And how many surgeries have you had?
I've had 10 German anaesthetics now.
Wow. And up to what age? Is that recently or is that for the whole life?
My last surgery was last year. I had a minor heart procedure. My last removal surgery was 2019. I had my gallbladder removed.
So how many surgeries do you have? 10?
Yeah. Well, 10 that have required a German anaesthetic, yeah.
And walk us through those 10, because I know we've skipped over your school years now. But walk us through those 10 and then we'll go back to your school years.
The major ones, I've had loads of exploratory surgeries as a kid because they couldn't work out what was wrong with me. I kept presenting with heaps of stomach pain, which is actually an Ehlers-Danlos thing. All the nerves are more exposed, therefore they get more easily irritated. So I was constantly in and out trying to find out why I was unable to stand up because my pain in my stomach was so bad.
Yeah.
I've had my appendix removed. I've had 6 teeth because Ehlers-Danlos also causes overcrowding in the jaw. The jaw is too small for the teeth. I had 6 teeth removed, adult teeth, and then I've had all 4 wisdom teeth removed under a general. Appendix, gallbladder, tonsils. I've had half my thyroid removed, and then 2 years later I had to have the rest of it removed, so I don't have a thyroid gland at all. And then last year I had a minor heart procedure because there's a miscommunication between aortic and ventricular parts of the heart. It doesn't communicate properly, so I get episodes where I'll be sat here and my heart rate will jump to about 200 beats a minute and I'm sat reading a book.
Right. Well, okay. So how did you first get to know that it was that condition? I mean, because I would imagine that was pretty hard, not only for yourself, but for your parents as well, or all of your family.
Yeah. So when I was 15, I got diagnosed with ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. And they bunged me on antidepressants at the age of 15 because they were convinced it was all in my head and it was just exam stress.
Yeah, that's always the right answer.
Yeah. They took out my appendix. And then if I'm honest, I've always been hypermobile. Like I was constantly having knee dislocations. If I put my arm up too excitedly in school, my shoulder would fall out. And then as a child, they found that I had one eye bigger than the other. And then they found out that my spine was curved and that was apparently why my eyes have developed. So I'm almost blind in my right eye, but my brain thankfully counters the two. Yeah, there was just multiple things. And when I got to 21, I asked my mum to go and see a specialist because I was so sure there was something really wrong with me that people just were ignoring and telling me I was fine. And yeah, so for my 21st birthday present, I asked her to pay to go and see a private consultant in London. And that started it all. So they did a scan of my thyroid and picked up that I had a growth in my thyroid. The NHS said it was normal. Everyone gets growths. And then a year later, I sent my mum a selfie when I was living out here in France. And she replied and said, "What the hell's that in your throat?" And it had grown so much that it was now visible to her in a photo. So I went to see a French surgeon who said there's no way it should have grown. You know, lots of people get nodules in their thyroid. That's pretty normal. But most people's would hit that kind of restrictive fascia wall and either rupture or kind of shrink back down. Because my walls stretch, everything is just allowed to grow. Like I've had a 7-centimeter ovarian cyst that ruptured on me and landed me in hospital for 3 days because it can just keep growing. There's nothing to stop it from growing. So I went back to the UK and had half of it removed, and they were absolutely adamant that the bit they left behind, a small growth on the other side, that it wouldn't grow. And 2 years later, I couldn't breathe because it was putting so much pressure on my windpipe. And at that point, they started to actually pay attention, and I went to see a rheumatologist who formally diagnosed me. I knew I'd had it from about the age of 19. I heard about it, and it ticked every single box for the pain and everything else. So yeah, finally got a diagnosis in 24. Yeah.
Is there any not resentment towards family, but is there anything that you wish would have been done differently earlier on?
Honestly, I think people do the best they can with the knowledge they have. Like there was no way that my mum could have possibly known. She doesn't have it, or well, we've now discovered she probably does have it, but she presents with different symptoms.
The reason I asked that,
there was no way.
No, I can see it. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, there was no way that anyone could have known. my older brother was born with hypermobile knees and he grew out of it, and everyone just assumed it was just one of those things you grow out of when you reach teenage years. And no, I mean, my mum feels so guilty for the genetic makeup that she's given me and the amount of ill health I've had to endure as a result of it. There's no.
So the reason I asked that question is, obviously, you know that I've got epilepsy, and my mum kept taking me to the doctor. They said, no, you've just got grand pains in the head. What a load of bollocks that was. But she kept taking me back. And she said, but if you capture it within the first 2 years of actually the first seizure, you're more likely to get it under control, and then obviously with medication, growing out of it. But it was 10 years left undiagnosed. And she said, well, I did take you. I am to blame. You're not. But there is people out there that do become resentful. And if there's just nothing that, in my opinion, nothing more my parents could have, or my mum could have done, to be honest. And in your case, your mum could have done.
No.
But there is people that do become resentful because it is unfortunate. You're in an unfortunate position, really. But it's how you deal with it.
And the thing with mine is, even if I'd been diagnosed earlier, if I'm honest, I don't think I'd have the life I have, because the people on the forums that have been diagnosed earlier are told by doctors, you know, as a child, you can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't be running, you shouldn't be swimming. I mean, I had to go and see a hand surgeon because I literally dislocated a knuckle paddling around in a swimming pool, 2019. The hand surgeon was like, well, what were you doing swimming? You've got Ehlers-Danlos. Shut up.
Well, so you can't swim.
No, I'm literally not supposed to do any form of actual exercise besides walking on flat surfaces. And as you know, that's not how I live my life. Like, I spend my weekends hiking, rock climbing, doing Via Yeah. And I think, had I been told as a child, I probably would have grown up scared, wearing braces and not developing the muscular strength I have to actually manage it myself. So in a way, I'm kind of glad I didn't know. And equally, doctors can't know everything. They just can't.
No, I agree.
It's a rare condition. It's not common. They look for horses. They don't look for zebras. And you and I are a zebra.
I completely agree. So going back to your sort of school years, obviously it weren't great. What sort of support did you, I won't touch on it too much, what sort of support did you receive, if any? Because from my experience, I didn't necessarily get bullied for the epilepsy, but it definitely was noticed if I'm standing there or staring at a wall for like 5 minutes or going like that, and people are going, what's this clown doing? He's in a completely different world of his own. Or I can't move because of my ankles, or whatever reason it may be. What was it like for yourself, or what support did you receive from people?
I mean, absolutely none. Absolutely none. I mean, I'd go to the nurse because of my shoulder and she'd put it back in again. And that would be it. Like, there would be no kind of, there was no support. I'm in some ways, I'm incredibly lucky that, to look at me, you would have no idea that I live with what I live with. No idea at all.
No.
And in some ways that makes me very lucky because there's no judgment towards me for it. I mean, in the UK, I could register as disabled, blue badge. I've chosen currently not to, because I can walk around. I don't feel like I need access to special parking and stuff like that. But
it's park on double yellows.
Got
its benefits.
But there are times where, you know, it's like, a month ago I dislocated my hip and I couldn't weight load it, and that would have been really helpful then to have been able to park closer to a supermarket. But so in lots of ways I'm very lucky no one knows to look at me that I live with it. In other ways, I wish people did know, because they might be kinder and a bit more patient.
They do now. They will do. And I think they should, because this is the reason why. The lack of knowledge around it. I mean, I don't know what it is, and that's, again, maybe through ignorance, but again, the people that didn't offer you support. Are there people aware of it? How many people are aware of it? Should more people be aware of this?
They reckon
should.
1 in 5,000 have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. I wish more people were aware of it, if I'm honest, in the medical community, and I wish teachers were aware of it. Anaesthetics, anesthesiologists, for example, like if I go for a surgery, I have to explain to them how careful they have to be, because obviously when I'm under an anesthetic, my joints are even more mobile.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wake up and they haven't realized they've dislocated my shoulder, moving me across gurneys. And I wake up with whatever they were doing and a really swollen shoulder because they haven't been aware that they need to be that careful. When you tell them, they kind of go, yeah, sure, you're hypermobile. And I'm like, no, I'm not just hypermobile. Yeah. I mean, the guy that took my gallbladder out argued with me that he'd done, I think, 4,000 gallbladder removals in his life and did not need to put a gauze in. And I told him that he did need to put a gauze in because I don't have an appendix and my intestines moved. And he refused, took out my gallbladder, and my intestines are now tucked under my ribcage. So I now can't teach or practice yoga, which was my entire livelihood up until that point. I can't fold forward. I can't wear tight clothes. I can't twist to the right without extreme pain afterwards. So yeah, I wish more people, certainly in the medical community, knew, and I wish teachers knew, because if they could help a child get diagnosed and just help them, understanding things like you're going to fidget more because you literally can't sit still because everything hurts. Like my mom was always telling me off because I was constantly fidgeting, but the reason I was constantly fidgeting was because my knees would, screaming at me and my hips would hurt. And kids get told that they've got ADHD, and it's like, well, maybe actually they're in pain and that's why they're fidgeting. I wish there was more awareness at those levels to catch it earlier.
I suppose that's why in your sort of later years, moving on into like going into your 18, or from 18 onwards, you decided to go traveling, didn't you?
Yeah.
I suppose you was like, fuck it, I'm off. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. So when did you end up?
So I left at 18 and went to Ghana on my first trip. And unfortunately, just by sheer unfortunate circumstances, contracted falciparum malaria.
I shouldn't laugh. Yeah. But you're so unlucky.
Yeah. I was taking antimalarials. For anyone that thinks I didn't, I did. Was fastidious with them. Socks, trousers tucked into my socks, long sleeves, all the rest of it. I got moved around Ghana by West African Rescue and then wound up in a UN hospital because I had liver failure, kidney failure, and my bladder had collapsed. And then I got medically evacuated with a surgeon and 2 nurses on the flight back to England after I was out there. I was in hospital for 3 weeks in Ghana.
Shit.
Yeah.
So what was the purpose of going out there? Was it just...
I'd always wanted to work and help other people. That was always the only thing I knew I wanted to do. Initially, I was going to teach. And then when I got to college, I decided I wanted to join the Royal Engineers and do landmine extraction.
Oh, wow.
So I went through the whole application process all the way through college, and unfortunately found out that hypermobility was a dead no, which threw a spanner in the works, because that was what I thought I was going to do at 18 when I left college. So that was why I went traveling, because it was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, and I don't want to just jump into college in uni for the sake of it. So I'm going to, yeah.
What else did you do after Ghana then? Because obviously contracting that, I would imagine that it did obviously put a hold on everything.
I got back and actually didn't cope very well with being back in England at all. So I Googled jobs abroad and found a job in a ski resort, and left 3 days after I applied for the job. So about 2 weeks after I got home, which in hindsight wasn't my smartest move, but I just needed to get out. So I came out to France, did a ski season. I dislocated both knees, my right shoulder, my right elbow. I broke 3 vertebrae in my back and 4 ribs.
Rewind.
That was...
You said you didn't cope very well. What do you mean you didn't cope very well? Did it affect your mental health?
Yeah.
How did it affect your mental health?
I think it was the first time I really realized that for whatever reason, my body was not on my side. Yeah, it was the first time it felt like I was trying to fight mentally and my body was just giving up on me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The ward I was in, in one of the hospitals, there were 7 of us and 2 of us survived. And it was the first time I realized at the age of 18, alone in a foreign country, that I think my health might actually beat me. And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't get flown home because I was too sick. They couldn't come out to visit me because my family didn't have the certificates and health, like jabs and stuff they needed. And then I got back to England, and bless her, my mum had lost more weight, I think, than I had from stress. But I remember being in the hospital bed, and the first thing she was worrying about was the state of the blanket at the end of the bed. And I'm thinking, I've literally been lying on a hay bale in a hospital being bitten by mosquitoes, knowing that I've got malaria, with no food, water coming out of plastic bags because they didn't even have bottles. I'm being injected with needles that aren't my own. Yeah, it was definitely the first time everything just felt so ridiculous in England. Like, first world problems just felt so irrelevant. And yeah, and my mental health did take a hit.
So what were your coping mechanisms? Obviously, I can't even begin to imagine what you went through. Everyone, I believe, will go through them.
Hmm?
I think everyone will go through some kind of struggle in their life. But yours, I can't even begin to imagine what you went through, or what you go through every day. But what are your coping mechanisms for that particular period?
They weren't. I didn't have a mental toolbox. It was literally just cut and run.
But you're still here.
Yeah. My toolbox was just to leave. So I came out. I did the season in France. Went to Indonesia for the summer of 2009. Did a winter in Austria. Did a summer in Cornwall. Did a winter back here in Morzine, where I stayed for 4 years. A winter in India, back. India, back. Yeah.
So essentially, you just travelled again.
Yeah.
What did you go to India for?
I got introduced to yoga as a coping mechanism in 2014 when my mental health completely collapsed. I didn't leave my flat for about 6 weeks. I hit a real low point. I was on 250 micrograms of antidepressants a day and 6 Xanax to try and control panic attacks. Like, I couldn't go to the supermarket without having a panic attack. I just hadn't coped with anything. I just packed and moved. It was easier, distract myself, change the background, keep yourself busy. And eventually I stopped traveling, and it all kind of caught up with me.
I think it's important for people to hear that. Obviously, someone that's travelled, that's living with an illness, that all of a sudden it can just go crashing down at some point.
Yeah, it was the mental side of it that caught up with me. Physically, I'd been sick wherever I was, so that didn't really change anything. But mentally, I'd kept myself so busy with distractions and a new job and a new town and a new city and a new country and a new hobbies and activities to try. And yeah, when I finally decided to stay here, it all caught up with me.
So would you say 18 to 21, you finally accepted your illness?
Yeah.
So I think I was a similar age, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I was a similar age when I accepted, right, okay, yeah, I've got that. That's when I actually, I was 18. I'd obviously been out, done the drugs, done everything out of my system, flatlined. I'm like, okay, yeah, now I need to start knuckling down. Not obviously to your level, but perhaps I can't keep up with my mates.
Yeah.
That's what I need. I need to take a different path, similar to yourself. But fitness is what saved me. It sounds like yoga saved you.
Yeah, yoga absolutely saved me mentally in a way that I, to this day, as a teacher, I still can't truly explain to people. The only way to experience it is just to practice it.
But then you traveled again after, didn't you?
Yeah, so I got introduced to yoga start 2014. I moved back to England actually that summer and started cognitive behavioral therapy with a counsellor. which was game changing in terms of understanding where I was and where I wanted to be and the kind of steps that I could start looking to take to get there. Yeah, and then carried on doing yoga and basically struck a deal with my mum that I would go to India, do my yoga course because I needed to understand why. I'm always a why person. Yeah, so the only way I could go and spend proper time doing it was to go and do a teacher training course to understand the philosophy and the meditation and the whys behind why it was making me feel so much better.
Why did it? No, I'm going to ask you, why did
it? Honestly, I think it's because, a bit like swimming, it forces you to be in the moment.
Right.
You can't, if you're breathing and moving, it's really hard to actually think about doing something else. It's like when people start meditating and they're like, well, how do I do it? My best advice is try and go front crawl swimming and think about anything other than breathing and front crawl swimming. Because the minute you do, you choke, you forget to turn your head and you take in water and you end up coming up coughing and spluttering. That for me was what yoga did. It forced me to stop being anywhere else and to just be where I was and be calm with where I was and who I was.
Yeah, I understand that, but at the same time, I think there's a flip side to it of, again, being busy with the mind. But again, I like the yoga principle of being present, being calm. But then, like, you know, what I do with my workouts, it's all out. That's it. I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's keeping the mind busy. So there's the fine line and then there's the balance. But I think what you've done, which people won't know until I ask the question and you tell people, of you're keeping your mind busy to keep it as a distraction to really address what the real issue is.
Yeah, yoga for me has bigger influence off the mat than it does in the time I spend on the mat. That's the difference for me between the gym and yoga. The gym for me is phenomenal when I'm in the gym.
But for people listening, what type of yoga is it? Because I think there's so many different types. There's so many different types of yoga. So what sort of type was it that you got?
I initially studied Ashtanga, which is a set sequence of postures that was incredibly tough on my body. I then did another course 2 years later in Vinyasa, and then a year after that, I studied Yin Yoga, which is much slower. Honestly, you'll get it with any kind of yoga. Realistically, what it teaches you is it teaches you to observe and not be drawn into the story of your mind, which has helped me a lot with my health, because at times, for example, if I have a dislocation, previously my head would be like, well, I can't do anything today at all. Whereas now I can kind of be like, okay, that was really uncomfortable, but it's back in socket. There's no damage. It hasn't ruined my day. I just need to adjust my day. So I don't go into the self-wallowing kind of pity party that would usually have taken most of the day of an incident. I can now be like, okay, yeah, that was uncomfortable. Next.
Right. Okay. So what about, like, because you said that you do hiking. Obviously, I know that you do hiking, things like that. How does that affect your body as well?
I'm slow. Can I ask my partner? I mean, if I don't have my poles, I have to put my hands on his backpack when we walk down a hill, because the pressure through my knees is just awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I did less, maybe I would have less dislocations, maybe. But when I do less, I have way more pain. So I'd rather have more regular subluxations where I can just kind of pop my knee back in place and carry on, than sit on the couch, wear braces, and deal with the amount of pain that comes up when I take a break from the gym or being active.
You know where I'm going to go with it? It's a case of you're going on a hike, you're pushing boundaries, constantly pushing it. And you'd ask me the same question, Lewis, why do you keep doing that? Why do you feel the need to do it if you've accepted the illness? I'm not saying you haven't accepted the illness, But
I've accepted the fact that it will always make my life different. I've also had to accept the fact that it is so unpredictable. That's the hardest part of Ehlers loss, is it has caused my thyroid to be removed, which has left me on lifelong medication to try and balance thyroid meds, which will affect everything else I choose to do in my life. The scoliosis has meant that, for example, I got a big C. I then got pneumonia. I then had a collapsed lung. It's the second time I've had a collapsed lung. At the moment, for example, my eyes aren't coping particularly well. Sometimes I can see really well. Sometimes I blink and everything is a blur and I can't see at all. And it turns out that's because my neck muscles are now not strong enough to hold my spine. So I now have cranial instability, which gives me tinnitus, horrific headaches, and blurred vision. And that started 3 months ago. I think the reason I constantly push my boundary and the reason I choose to live and miss my family, but live somewhere so beautiful, is because you never know with Ehlers when you're just not going to be able to live your life like you can. I know people who have gone deaf, literally one morning, just gone deaf because the bones have just not had the support. So they've moved and they can't hear. I've got a friend who now is on a feeding tube because she can't eat, she can't swallow anymore. Which 2 months ago was something I was staring at. I swallowed a ibuprofen tablet that got stuck in my throat. And it turned out my entire GI tract had contracted and hadn't relaxed. It was just spasming. And every time I ate, I thought I was going to throw up. And for me, that's why. It's not that I haven't accepted it. It's the fact that I know I have a deck of cards. And even if I never pick up another card, they're going to change. I can just play them as best I can and enjoy the fact that I can be up a mountain one day and the next day, okay, maybe I'll be in bed and it will but I still got up the mountain. That's why I went to Nepal this year.
that's what
because I just never thought I would do it.
That's what I was actually referring to, and I was actually referencing to someone else that may have it, or that could potentially have it. That goes, or that hopefully they are listening, and is thinking to themselves, "Well, if you've got it, then why are you pushing yourself?" That's the reason.
That's my
Because I don't have it. I can't articulate it the way that you possibly can. Is that really you just don't know what's going to happen the next day? For epilepsy, obviously, I can say that being at risk of SUDEP, if you are, is sudden unexplained death in epilepsy. It's just one day, that's it. So you've got to do what you do. With yourself, it's the same.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's exactly why you're doing what you do. Obviously, different paths, but it's the same outcome. That's why you're doing it. So really, yes, you've accepted it. I think you personally have, knowing you, I know you have, but there's a reason that you're doing it, and that's going, I want to do it because of this reason here. And everyone will be different.
Yeah.
The people that will say I've accepted it, but I'm happy living my life with my family and my kids.
Yeah, and Ehlers presents differently in different people. So, if you're on a feeding tube and you're deaf, of course you can't do the things that I'm fortunate enough that at the moment, some days I can do. There are some people who literally can't stand up without wearing braces. And that's very different to my experience where, okay, I have to stand up and crack my knees back in socket after every time I sit down, but I can still stand up and use and rely and trust my legs. Nepal was my biggest accomplishment. And part of that was honestly just to try and inspire people growing up who are told they can't, and be like, you can. It's not easy and it's going to hurt, but you can.
Tell me more about Nepal.
It was a 15-day. It took me 15 days. My partner did it before and did it up and down in 10, and it took me 15 to get up, but I still got up. We hiked to 5,500 meters above sea level, which is 1,000 meters higher than Mont Blanc, which is my goal for next year. It was
a trek.
yeah, it was a trek. And obviously, having had a pneumothorax, I didn't know how how my lungs were going to cope with the air pressure change.
How did that cope with you breathing?
The year before, I didn't know whether my heart was going to cope with the oxidation drop.
Yeah.
I didn't know if my knees were going to cope. Yeah, but we did it. We'll roll of tape.
Not a lot of people would even attempt it.
No, but again, in another way, this condition and having malaria have forced me to really look at the world differently. It's like, you just never know.
But then I suppose you've studied a lot and become very aware of your limitations. I wouldn't say limitations, but you become aware of your body. So you're rehabilitation coach as well, aren't you? Personal trainer.
Yeah.
What else have you done?
So, kind of like I said at the beginning, when someone tells me to do something, I always want to know why. And after I had my thyroid removed, someone told me to cut out gluten, dairy, grains, sugar, and caffeine. And I was like, all right. And I felt great, but no one could tell me why I would feel great, why it was going to help. Everyone was like, well, just do it. Same with the yoga. Everyone was like, well, it just does. Yeah, but why? Like, why does breathing in the morning make me, concentrated breathing, not just being a human, make me feel better? And no one wanted to explain why, which is why. So I went off and did a nutritional therapy diploma up to level 5. And I've done, obviously, my personal training qualifications. I've studied yoga. I've done 650 hours of yoga study. I did a degree in sport rehabilitation, which included biomechanics, strength and conditioning, rock tape, so I can now tape my own joints, and sports masseuse, so that I can kind of, look after my own body, but also, it cost me a fortune to start seeing different people. And given the, probably know what it's like, living with a chronic condition, it can present, even if it's epilepsy, a seizure could mean that you injure your shoulder, and then having to explain that to someone who has no idea what you're talking about kind of forces you to almost detach from your story rather than take ownership of it.
Yeah, no, it does. Well, a lot of time, for example, just driving. Again, my business partners, they would probably listen to this, and it'd be a case of, right, guys, you drive today. Well, you can drive. I can drive. However, if it's sunny outside and we're going down a motorway, you're all right because I've got it. But if your partner, for example, you're leaving them behind, and then they're left, and they're like, I didn't think of it that way. You got to think of the much bigger picture, that I'm leaving my family, you could potentially be leaving, and they don't think of the actual wider picture. But that's always at the back of my mind, that if I'm in the car on my own, I'm absolutely fine because I can deal with it. But if there's anyone that's surrounding you, you've always got to think of that. And I suppose you're in the same situation.
Yeah, to a much lesser extent, thankfully, than the risks that obviously come with living with epilepsy the way you do.
Well, you still are with your partner as well.
Yeah.
Climbing that mountain, your partner's with you all the way.
Yeah. And he was very, very aware that there were going to be potential hiccups and problems along the way.
So I think that you shouldn't downplay it at all. From where you've come from, being a beanbag, having everything go wrong with you, like malaria, the operations you've had, pretty much everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. From what you said, pretty much tendons, ligaments, every joint that can go wrong has gone wrong. It can pop out. So now, you do yoga, but you can't bend forward. That's an achievement in itself.
Yeah, it's definitely a different practice to the one I used to have. But yeah, my goal was to educate myself so that I knew my why. And then I've realized that I really want to be a one-stop shop as best I can. There will always be things I don't know the answer, and I'll have to call on other people to come in and kind of advise or send clients to a dietitian or someone more qualified. But for most people, I can hear that story once They don't have to tell 5, 6, 7 different people and invest in 5, 6, 7 different types of therapies. They can come to me and I can genuinely say, right, we can look at your nutrition, we can look at your movement patterns, we can look at rehabbing joint injuries, we can look at integrating breath work, meditation to help you manage pain levels or life stress. And in a way, every injury I've had has allowed me to learn more about the human body. And when people come to me and they're like, oh, you wouldn't understand, I'm like, try me.
Well, I think you're absolutely amazing. I think there's so many people that should be reaching out to you. It doesn't have to be about your illness. It could be about stress management. It could be about life in general. It can be about your new venture that you've got, which is it's the coaching about, obviously, you tell everyone what it's about.
So I've set up an online health and fitness, health being the major part of what we do, coaching program called Puzzle. Because I genuinely think a journey to actual health, and that can be because you just want to lose some weight and tone up. That's fine. That's, whatever the reason. But to actually make it last, you need to understand the why. Anyone can cut out certain food groups and do cardio 6 times a week and strength training 5 times a week, and you're going to get shredded, but you're never going to stick to it. So we work on the what I call the puzzle pieces, because the corners are the bits you always find first. And in health, that's always going to be stress management, sleep, steps, because they are so important, and water. So we start with those. We put in place breath work in the morning. We put in place meditation practices. We start to unpack what part of those corners you struggle with, and we work around developing habits for that. Then we add in the edges, which are the next bit you'd find on a puzzle, which is your food. Some people track, some people don't want to track. Some people just send me photos of their food, and I can be like, well, let's swap this for that. Let's look at, are you actually meeting your vitamin needs? Did you know that you need to eat this to be able to absorb that? Did you know that omega-3, if you've got arthritis, will reduce pain? And
well, that's one thing that you told me. Well, for anyone that didn't know, obviously I worked with Katie before, and everyone that knows I have arthritis, she's like, that's food is shit. Stop eating that. Stop drinking 8 cups of coffee in a day, because that's going to impact the amount of medication that you have. I was like, sorry. So I was being told off. And the puzzle theory that Katie's referring to is exactly what she was saying, and it works. So anyone listening, I highly recommend it. But sorry, I had to butt in there because
I'm glad it helped.
It did. It does. But what I would, again, I can only refer back to what you used to tell me, is because I love the high intensity workouts, but you were still saying, no, don't do just that. Go back to your sleep. Go back to obviously not just the sleep, but it was the sleep, the stress management. But you would know already before we jumped on a call if I was stressed or not, by the amount of work I'd done, the amount of food I'd eaten. And that used to just blow my mind. I was thinking, how would you know? But then if you'd been through it, I suppose that's what used to amaze me. But I suppose if you've already got the framework set out, and that's what was important to me.
Yeah, I mean, exercise is the last part we add. So we tend to add that on week 3 or week 4, because, I mean, you can do whatever exercise you're doing before, but exercise will be the last thing I add into someone's journey, because of course it's important, of course it is, but if you are getting your steps in every day and you are looking after kind of your real health, of course exercise is important. It's going to keep your bones strong, it's going to help reduce blood pressure, it's going to make you feel better, it's going to improve strength around joints if that's something you struggle with, it's going to improve injuries. But in terms of your health, if you lose those 4 corners, your health is going to deteriorate faster than your bones will deteriorate just by not doing strength training every week. So that's why we start with the corners.
Brilliant. Katie, it's been amazing having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you?
So on social media, I'm Katie's Healthy Space. Sometimes I feel like that should be Katie's Not So Healthy Space, but it is Katie's Healthy Space. And that's where you'll find me if you want to reach out for puzzle coaching or anything like that.
Thank you very much, Lauren. I really appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome.
Cheers.